Some words are never meant to arrive late. On a cold November morning in 2019, Sarah Mitchell opened her mailbox and found an envelope that shouldn't exist. The handwriting was familiar. The postmark read August 12, 1999. Inside that envelope was a letter that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her life, her choices, and the person she used to be. This is the true story of a message lost in time, and the impossible decision it forced one woman to make. Sarah Mitchell was 42 years old when the letter arrived. She lived in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, a life that looked from the outside perfectly ordinary. She had built a good life, a steady career as a librarian, a comfortable home, a routine that felt safe. But there are some stories we tell ourselves, and some truths we bury so deep we forget they're there. 20 years earlier, in the summer of 1999, Sarah was a different person. She was 22, fresh out of college, standing at the edge of everything, full of dreams, uncertainty, and a love she wasn't sure she deserved. His name was Daniel Carter. They met during their senior year. He was studying architecture. She was drowning in literature and poetry. They were opposites in every way, and maybe that's why it worked. For 2 years, they were inseparable. But in the summer of 1999, everything fell apart. Daniel had been offered an opportunity in London, a prestigious internship that could launch his entire career. It was everything he'd worked for, and Sarah had been accepted into a graduate program across the country. They were young. They were scared, and neither of them knew how to fight for something when the world was pulling them in opposite directions. So they made a choice that so many young people make. They let go. No dramatic fight. No ultimatum, just a quiet ending. Daniel left for London in August. Sarah threw herself into her new life. And slowly, painfully, they became strangers. Years passed. Sarah convinced herself she'd moved on. She dated other people. She built her career. She told herself that Daniel was just a chapter in her past, a beautiful, bittersweet memory. But some chapters never really close. November 14th, 2019. Sarah was running late for work. She grabbed the mail without thinking. Bills, advertisements, the usual clutter of modern life. And then she saw it. The handwriting stopped her cold. It was Daniel's. She would recognize it anywhere. Those careful, architectural letters. The way he drew his S with that little loop at the top, but that wasn't what made her heart stop. It was the postmark, August 12, 1999. 20 years ago. The summer they said goodbye. For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. Her mind raced through impossible explanations. A cruel prank? A mistake? But no, this was real. The envelope was weathered, aged. It had traveled through time. She sat at her kitchen table for an hour, just staring at it because she knew, once she opened that envelope, everything would change. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Finally, with shaking hands, she opened it. The letter was 7 pages long, written in blue ink. Some words were smudged, as if he'd been crying when he wrote them. It began, "Sarah, I'm sitting at the airport and I can't get on that plane without telling you the truth." What followed was everything she'd needed to hear 20 years ago, and everything she'd learned to live without. Daniel had written the letter the night before his flight to London. He'd poured everything into those pages. His fears, his regrets, his realization that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. He wrote about how he'd convinced himself that letting her go was the mature thing to do. That they were too young. That long distance would destroy what they had. But sitting in that airport, watching strangers say goodbye to the people they loved, he finally understood he'd been wrong. I don't want to be mature if it means losing you. I don't want to be practical if it means spending my life wondering what if. I love you, Sarah. I love you in a way that doesn't make sense and doesn't fit into anyone's plan. And I can't get on this plane without asking you, is there any chance? Any possibility that we could try? But there was more. At the end of the letter, Daniel had written his phone number in London, his new address, a promise that if she called anytime for any reason, he would find a way back. I'll wait, he wrote. However long it takes. I'll wait. But the letter never arrived. Somewhere in the vast machinery of the postal system, that envelope, carrying all of Daniel's hope and vulnerability, had simply vanished. It fell between the cracks. It was lost. And for 20 years, Daniel thought Sarah had received his letter and chosen silence. For 20 years, Sarah thought Daniel had left without looking back. Two people, separated by 7 pages that never reached their destination. Sarah's first instinct was to find him. After 20 years, after a letter that had defied time itself, she needed to know, was there still a chance? But finding someone after 2 decades isn't like the movies. Daniel Carter was a common name. And without social media in 1999, without maintaining mutual friends, people could simply disappear. She searched for hours, days. She found fragments. A Daniel Carter who'd worked on a building project in Singapore in 2005. An award-winning architect in Sydney in 2012. But none of the photos were clear enough. None of the details quite matched. She reached out to old college friends. Most had lost touch with Daniel years ago. One remembered hearing he'd gotten married. Another thought he might have moved back to the States. The trail went cold, and then Sarah found something that changed everything. An obituary. Daniel James Carter, aged 41, passed away in March 2017. The details matched. The hometown, the college, the year he would have graduated. For a moment, Sarah's entire world went silent. He was gone. The letter had arrived. But the person who wrote it no longer existed. 20 years too late had become forever too late. But grief has a strange way of demanding answers. Sarah couldn't let it go. She needed to understand. She needed to know what had happened in those 20 years. Whether Daniel had been happy. Whether he'd ever thought about her. Whether she'd been wrong about everything. She found his sister, Rebecca, through the obituary's funeral home. It took 3 tries before she answered. And when she did, the truth came pouring out. Daniel had waited. For months after arriving in London, he'd checked his messages obsessively. He'd asked friends if Sarah had called. He'd second-guessed every word of that letter, convinced he'd scared her away. But she never responded. So eventually, like we all do, he tried to move forward. He built his career. He fell in love again, or at least he tried to. He married a woman named Claire in 2005. They had a daughter. But Rebecca told Sarah something that broke her heart all over again. He never forgot you, she said. Even when he was happy, even when life was good, there was always this sadness in him. Like he was carrying something he couldn't put down. Daniel's marriage ended after 6 years. Not because of anything dramatic. Just because, as he'd confessed to his sister, he'd realized he was being unfair, trying to love someone while his heart still belonged to a ghost. And then, In 2015, Daniel was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. He fought for 2 years. And in those final months, according to Rebecca, he talked about Sarah constantly. He wondered if she'd gotten the letter. He wondered if things would have been different. He wondered if somewhere out there she sometimes thought about him too. "He loved you his whole life," Rebecca said. "I think you should know that." Some stories don't have happy endings, but that doesn't mean they don't have meaning. Sarah spent weeks processing what she'd learned. The grief, the regret, the impossible weight of knowing that a simple twist of fate, a lost letter, had altered the course of 2 entire lives. She visited his grave. It was in a quiet cemetery outside Seattle. He'd moved back to the States in 2010, just 3 hours away from her. They'd been so close. She stood there for an hour talking to him, telling him about her life, about the letter, about everything she wished she could have said, and then she did something that surprised even herself. She wrote him back, 7 pages, just like his letter. She told him about the life she'd lived, the choices she'd made, the moments she'd thought about him, more than she'd ever admitted to anyone. She told him about the relationships that never quite worked, the feeling that something was always missing, the dreams she'd had where they were young, again, and everything was still possible. She told him she was sorry, and she told him she loved him, had always loved him, in a way that transcended time and logic and even death. But she didn't mail it. Instead, she burned it, because some letters aren't meant to arrive. Some words are just for us, a way of releasing what we've carried for too long. In the months that followed, Sarah made changes. She started volunteering at the local post office, helping elderly residents with their mail. She became an advocate for lost mail recovery, a small, quiet mission to ensure that other people's words found their way home. She reconnected with old friends she'd lost touch with. She stopped putting off phone calls and visits. She learned to say the things that mattered before time ran out, because if Daniel's letter had taught her anything, it was this: words have power. Connection is fragile, and sometimes the biggest tragedy isn't heartbreak, it's silence. The letter still hangs in Sarah's home today, not hidden away in a drawer, but framed on her wall, a reminder of love and loss, of timing and fate, of all the things we can't control and the few precious things we can. People often ask her if she wishes the letter had arrived on time. If she wishes she could go back and change everything, her answer might surprise you. "I used to wish that," she says. "But now, I think the letter arrived exactly when I needed it. Not when I was 22 and unprepared, but when I was ready to understand what it really meant." Because here's what Sarah learned. We all carry letters we never sent, words we never said, chances we didn't take because we were scared or uncertain or convinced there would be more time, but time doesn't wait. Daniel's letter traveled 20 years to teach Sarah and all of us a simple truth. Say the thing. Tell the person. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because perfect moments are a myth we tell ourselves to avoid being vulnerable. Sarah still thinks about Daniel. Probably always will, but she doesn't live in regret anymore. She lives in gratitude for the love they shared, for the letter that found its way home, for the reminder that even after 20 years, even after death, love doesn't disappear. It just transforms. So if there's someone you've been meaning to call, if there's something you've been afraid to say, if there's a letter you've been putting off writing, don't wait, because you never know when 20 years might pass. And by then, it might be too late, or it might be exactly on time.